Hello and welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. If you knew that you could do good for an audience, roughly anywhere from, say, 15 to 30% of the general population all over the world, and turn them into fans of your business, people with real purchasing power, but who consume digital content in often a somewhat different way, and if you could likely increase their love for you, all while doing just a few things that would make your site even better for crawling on search engines with better SEO, or even convert with better CRO, once they get to a point of a lead or sale, then would you do it? Would you do something that also makes your legal team happier to avoid compliance issues? Would you do better marketing just so that you feel better about yourselves, all while reaching an audience who is often missed but full of opportunities? Jason McKee is the Chief Marketing Officer of Accessibility Shield. And on this episode, we'll discuss accessibility, ADA compliance, search engines, SEO, Google, Al Gore, Vint Cerf, Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder, Mandy Harvey, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a man carrying an accessibility shield with a shark who cares about accessibility on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today on A Shark's Perspective. Tell us what your story and background is, please.
Sure. Hi, Kenneth. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Little background on my career is I was in advertising and digital marketing for most of my career. Prior to that, I was a journalist for about 8 years. And I had a meeting that changed my life. My partner and I went in to see a potential client, and the gentleman was blind, and he showed us how he used the internet and told us about the problems with it. And that changed our mission as a company. We pulled resources and started a new company, and that's what we're about. We're about fixing the web.
Wow. So, accessibility is an issue I don't hear about very often in a lot of circles, which is disappointing because I probably am the one that brings it up the most. But it's really a massive problem. And, you meet one person that can change your life, just like it has for me on many occasions with meeting people with amazing stories like that. But I've spoken with you about my friend, the singer Mandy Harvey from America's Got Talent fame, and she and I talk about this all the time, what she can or cannot access in regards to content. But it's a huge audience all over the world. I've often read it's like 1 in 5 people who are disabled in some capacity and can't consume content the same way, whether it's for the blind, the deaf, or other. But explain, if you will, what the size of the market is for people all over the world, but really why is it so close to home and how it affects us.
Yeah, and it's a good point. It's a good question. And a lot of the things that I run into as we do this is first a kind of a reaction of how did I not know this? How was I not aware of any of this? And how it's so large. And there's a little bit of that, and I run into that in all my meetings every day, everywhere. Is I didn't know about this. And these are chief technologists. These are smart people, good people, but not everybody knows about it. Once you know about it, it changes your perspective.
Agreed.
And in terms of the size of the audience, the CDC says 27% of Americans have a disability that they need assistance with. That's a lot of people. We have, say, 300 million people. That adds up really quick. But worldwide, it's the same number. That number is pretty standard across the globe. So we're talking about 1 billion people or more that have a need for something. And there's a few countries out there that are progressive enough, smart enough, fair enough, and advanced enough to acknowledge this and do something about it. America isn't traditionally one of those countries. We have a lot of great things. We do a lot of great work, and civil rights happened, and it's a fascinating story about how that rolled into our country. And right behind that was the Americans with Disabilities Act. Right now, we bring this up, and people say there's too many damn handicapped parking spaces at the mall, and that's the kind of reaction we get, which it's unfortunate in our society that we still have this misconception about what this is. This is a country saying we believe in equality and fairness for everybody. And once you know somebody who's hit with a debilitating disease or is paralyzed or blinded because of a congenital disorder, it changes how you approach this. If someone you love, if you know someone like Mandy, her, you're friends with her, she's dealing with this challenge every day on her own by herself. Should the country that supports us as a society have anything to do with making her life a little bit easier? The answer for me is yes. The people that I get to talk to about this, that understand it. I mean, the fact that we have the ADA law is big because that was a big step for a nation to say, they had to go back and retrofit infrastructure across the world,
Absolutely.
Across the country. That was a huge undertaking. It took a lot of work, for for Congress to get anything done, we know is difficult anyway. It's complicated, but this is something that doesn't seem to polarize people that much. I've had people come up to me after a talk at shows and say, this is the only thing that doesn't start an argument. This is the only thing that doesn't divide us further, because everyone, reasonable people are like, yeah, this makes sense. So that law, the interesting thing about this is that law was written before the web existed, right? But the language in it is about equality and fairness, and it's about accommodating the public. If you're a company, all those rules apply, whether it's your pizza shop down the street or your website where you're selling widgets. It doesn't matter, and that is what's happening in our country today. The lawsuits are being filed using the ADA language, holding the companies accountable and saying you're doing business online and you're making it inaccessible. And we don't want to do this as a punishment. I don't want to go around and slap people and say this is wrong. We're trying to have a conversation, because most developers don't know what accessibility means.
Exactly.
So we want to talk about it and say this is how it impacts your users, and the benefits are obviously equal and fair enjoyment for everybody, but also there's 27% of the marketplace that everyone's missing because they don't understand what they're blocking.
Well, there aren't too many handicap parking spots. There are too many morons who borrow the person's handicap tag and then go park there. That's what drives me nuts. And I've had plenty of friends and relatives who actually needed the spots, and it just makes me go ballistic when I see somebody use one of those spots. But, one of the other issues is that so often this topic of accessibility, it is not brought up by your chief marketing officer. It's not brought up by your CEO. I'm trying to think of the last time I've heard anybody as an chief experience officer talk about it, but it's always brought up by legal. And that's where it sometimes either gets lessened in the loudness of the voice or marginalized to a point where, a lot of people who have the capability, especially the marketers in the world, to change this. And that's, I think, part of the problem, is that not enough people are talking about it. It may be that there is an immense amount of noise around that area, around legal and compliance. There's plenty of conferences that talk about this, but I don't know that that's really what's going to help move the needle to make the changes as well.
Well, that's a really good point, man, because it's something that's, in our conversations every day. I mentioned, before we started, about the meeting yesterday in New York. These are the people who created the ADA law. They wrote the law, and they helped get that passed, and then they helped enforce it and implement it across the country. And when you talk to these people, they're mostly nonprofit types, like disability rights. They come from a good place. They're good people.
Absolutely.
And the thing that they hate the most is what we call drive-by lawsuits. And in New York, where they're based, they were saying once the law passed, there was lawyers, suit and tie, walking up and down the street, measuring doorways and entrances and angles of ramps and all. And he said, the last thing I want is a lawyer with a measuring tape. He's like, I don't want that.
Right.
He's like, the engineer should have the measuring tape. So this gentleman named James Weissman he's famous in this industry, and he's done a lot of good work, has a lot of friends. He hates those lawsuits because the perception it gives the public is that this is an industry that's about making lawyers money. So when they wrote the law, they tried to make it so that you can't generate a lot of money for the lawyers or the fraudulent plaintiffs by doing that. So that's why you don't get hit with like $1 million fine like you will in a data privacy thing. And that's the conversation, in the marketing industry, as well as I do, when they're talking about compliance and risks, they're looking at how much it can cost them. So if it's every offense is $1,000 or $1,500 a day for this or that, then the bean counters are like, boy, this can add up. Let's fix this. Let's take care of this. For this issue, if they don't understand it, they just look at how much it could cost them, which most of these cases, there's about 2,500 lawsuits filed last year. I think 95%, I was told, settled out of court within 30 days or less. And those figures aren't public, but we have a lot of relationships with lawyers who defend against this and are involved in it. And they say it's about $30,000 to $50,000 for every time somebody settled. So you do have these lawyers who know, if I just go up and rattle this cage with this company owner and bring a disabled person with me, and in a couple of weeks, I'll get a check for $30,000. I'll, share some of that with my client. That's what we're trying to prevent. But on the other side of that coin, which I thought when I started out that, I was really against those lawsuits and I was making a lot of noise about it. And I didn't understand everything, and I still don't. So I'm trying to back off on making quick judgments. We met an attorney at a show in San Francisco who was a plaintiff's attorney, which means he was filing those lawsuits. And when he walked on the stage, everyone booed him. It was a group of accessibility-minded folks who were trying to do the right thing, and they thought this guy was grabbing quick money. And it turns out, after hearing him talk, that he's not. And he told us about who his plaintiffs were and how legitimate these cases are and why he does it. And he explained, he's like, this is the only thing keeping the conversation alive is my lawsuits. He's like, whatever you guys are doing, it's not working because no one's talking about it. Nobody understands it. Nobody knows about it. So I did hear his point and said, you know what, there's a little bit of truth to that if it's legitimate, but we have the illegitimate lawsuit. There's a lawyer who was actually disbarred already for these ADA website lawsuits because he filed like over 1,000 in a month. And it was so egregious that they took his license from him. So we have to stop that. But at the same time, we have to accommodate the disabled. And it's a balancing act that we do every single day over here.
Well, so your focus is a lot more on the digital side. And how do I know if I'm a business today, especially in the digital marketing realm, if I have a problem or not?
So that's a good question. And the simple answer is you're not. There's nobody who's accessible out there. Even the companies that are working at it, there's a couple that we've run across that have an entire team on this. They've been focused on it for a long time, and everything is 100% accessible on their sites. Now, that's very unusual. And let me give you an example. If you, let's say you are the IT director for Macy's, and you have 500,000 pages on your website and millions of visitors and all this stuff. You have shopping carts, you have registrations. It's complicated stuff. And somebody comes along and says, oh, are we compliant? The amount of work involved in going back to look at everything, not to mention the stuff that's being built every single day, every living, growing things, right? So we don't want to go at it with, hey, am I compliant or not? I'm trying to avoid that type of question and answer because it's a fluid thing. So what we want is people to acknowledge digital accessibility and work toward it. And that can mean, and we've seen this in the courts, whether it's the physical infrastructure or digital, this has happened in both sides of the coin. It's a company saying, yeah, we're aware of this. We learned about it. And they show reporting and say, this is what we've done since we learned about it. And this is our priority. And this is our tentative timeline, to stay on top of this. We didn't budget for it. So we had to, find money to handle it. And we can only afford, 100 hours a month or whatever it is. And that's our approach to it. It's fair and reasonable. And that's going to go a long way in the court. So our message is to all the companies is just take a look, start figuring out, ask your IT people to take a look and see how bad it is. But once you start, that's your first step in defending yourself in court. And it's your first step to becoming accessible.
Well, it may not be a problem for most people, but the lawsuits are starting to build up. And obviously, Domino's is a perfect example where, in 2019, the Supreme Court denied Domino's the ability to stop a lawsuit where it gave a victory to a blind man who sued him over site accessibility. And the Supreme Court, I think, denied a petition from them as to whether or not their website was accessible for the disabled that left in place a lower court decision against the company. Obviously, Domino's is a huge company. It's a massive target for somebody to go after. And well-known national brands like that are always going to be probably front and center for these types of attorneys. But elaborate, if you will, how this could impact business as a whole, whether it's small or large. Does the local pizza shop who has an app, for example, like Domino's did, need to be in fear of reprisal here if somebody went after them?
Right. Now that's a good point. And that case is a transitional point for our industry. That case, it's kind of interesting. There's a couple details about that. First of all, Domino's went through a period where they were losing customers. They had a new CEO who did some ads about actual complaints from customers, photos of ugly pizzas that had been delivered. And they kind of put all their dirty laundry out and said, look, we know this happened. We've changed our ways and we fixed everything. And part of that fix was the Pizza Tracker app and the mobile app, which they spent a lot of money in. And I guess I'm not a big Domino's customer, but it's convenient. It helps you order your pizza and everyone loves it, but it's completely inaccessible, as are 99.9% of all mobile apps. Now, they are just as required as a website or a building to be accessible. So there is no, oh, it's just an app stuff, which is what Domino's tried to say in the beginning. The man who filed that complaint started out, in my opinion, being pretty reasonable and saying, well, I'd like to use this because there's a discount and because it lets me build my pizza and I'd like to use it. And Domino's was quick to shut him down, and they did not give at all. They weren't, oh, let me help you do this. The only thing they really offered as a solution was, why don't you just call in? And that was a PR move. That's more of a, all the people who don't understand this want to say, yeah, why can't that guy just call in? I mean, what the hell? Why does he have to use it? That's what they're trying to stoke up. And they did a pretty good job of that. They're a big company and there's some smart people there. They also had the United States Chambers of Commerce, Restaurant Legal Fund. They had national groups backing them, saying, yeah, we don't want to have to deal with this either. So everyone was pulling the resources and getting on the Domino's bandwagon about how the disabled people don't need digital accessibility because it shouldn't be a thing. And they fought and they fought and they fought and they spent a lot of money and they kept losing. And they were able, with all their clout, to get it all the way to a petition to the Supreme Court saying, you need to look at this because this law doesn't make sense. Nobody knows what it means. It's too complicated for us and it's too expensive for our little pizza company to be able to comply with this. A total bullshit argument. And the Supreme Court, they wouldn't even look at it. And they said, the lower court already ruled on this. It's a just law and you're out of compliance. Fix it. So that was a watershed moment for the industry because no one else, that was their last ditch attempt for companies to say, we don't want to get into this. We already have to deal with data privacy. We already have to deal with cybersecurity. We already have to deal with Telephone Consumer Protection Acts. They're so overwhelmed, they say, with compliance and regulation that they shouldn't have to deal with it. Well, that argument's been heard and been rejected. So now that we all can come together and say, okay, everyone has to be digitally accessible, what does that mean? And that's the conversation we're trying to have today. We're trying to educate. I mean, I have chief technology officers telling me that doesn't apply to my industry. And these are people who've been in the business for 25, 30 years. They know technology, but they don't understand the regulation standards. And so our mission is to get the word out. That's really what we do, is just to educate and talk about it. We're not saying call me and give me money so I can make your website accessible. It's nothing to do with that. Once we get the conversation to a point where everyone understands what this is about, then we all, as a society, have an entire internet to fix. So there's a lot of work to do, and we don't want to have to do all the work. We want to help people understand what the work is. And one of the things we do is we train our clients' teams to be able to hand it off and say, okay, this is what it is. This is how it works. This is how you do it. And then we hand it off. We want them to be able to do it on their own, so that if the local pizza shop hires a WordPress guy to build a $1,000 website, that will also be accessible. It'll use the correct templates. It'll have the right standards in it. That is not too much to ask. We just have to get to the point where everyone understands it and knows about it.
Oh, I agree. And I think this is going to become such a much bigger problem. One is the lawsuits continue to grow, but also there's so many more entrepreneurs today than there were. And, people are rushing to create products. I can't tell you one time that I've ever had a conversation where an agency said to me on the front end, who was helping relaunch or launch a website, that we need to do this to help make the site more accessible to people. I haven't heard that in a conversation with anybody on the front end about an app. I've had this conversation with entrepreneurs before, just to try to help give them some guidance. And it's not just me. I think I'm seeing this over and over and over. And I think as this continues to grow, it's just going to become more prevalent. And to your point, everybody wants to re-engineer this. They look at this like they're re-engineering a fix as opposed to doing this on the front end. And that's the legal and technical side. So let's shift a little bit to opportunities, or rather opportunities missed, I guess, from a sales and lead standpoint. With so many customers out there who have some sort of disability, talk about what you're hearing from companies who are at least embracing this audience to help them really just attract and provide a better experience to those consumers.
Well, that's a good question, man. We see a couple of emotional changes with clients as we get in, depending on who we're talking to and what the level of understanding is. But we've had some, larger companies where maybe the actual precise dollar amount isn't that big of a concern. They have that luxury.
Sure.
They've come on board and said, listen, guys, we know that you can do this and you understand this and you're the experts. So just do it, get it done. And then you'll later on, in a less professional setting, we'll hear something like, well, my mother suffered from this, or
Exactly.
I had my kid did that. We all have some kind of connection, and that's what we're trying to get to. It's not business, it's not revenue, and it's not political. This is us being the kind of society that cares for its people. Which, however you want to think about America, that's fine. I happen to love it. I think we are fortunate to live in a place we do, in a time we do. And I think this is another great thing that we can do. And on top of that, the conversation we had with the people who wrote this law 30 years ago, on their radar right now is now some of these people are getting up in age now, and they're suffering from macular degeneration, which is something we all are going to suffer from because we live longer now, and our eyesight's going to go. So on top of having a huge segment of the population who are consumers, by the way, losing their vision, we also have a society that's forcing everyone to use phones and computers to conduct your daily business and carry on your relationships. So you're staying in touch with your kids and your grandkids that are, on the other side of the planet using technology. You're paying your bills using the technology. Well, when all of a sudden that technology is not accessible to you, and you have no other options but to use that technology just to do your daily life, what are we going to have then? Because then it's going to be everything's on fire. Oh my gosh, all these people now, they're influential because they have money. They're old and wise, so they have a way to go in and make an argument. And they're going to come in and they're going to say this whole thing is broken. Why didn't anybody fix it? And that's what we're trying to prevent. If we get on it right now, we'll be okay. But that's a huge segment of the baby boomers. Their eyesight's going every day right now, and you and we're going to be in that same boat soon. So when we partnered with the American Foundation for the Blind, Pennsylvania Association for the Blind, a couple other nonprofit groups. And these agencies help people with visual impairment. But the top of their conversation is always macular degeneration. It's not someone who's blinded, even though that is who they serve and that's where they come from and where their heart is. They know that in practical terms, we have a huge wave that's about to crash on our older population, and it's going to prevent them from using technology. And we got to figure out a way to handle it right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm Generation Z. Some even consider me double A. So I don't. My eyes are good for years. So no, I could not agree more. But
Young and healthy guy.
I think one thing too that's just really interesting is you see so many companies as well who, and I don't want to get on a moral high horse, but you'll see a lot of companies who give money towards various charities, and I'm 100% for that. I just think if you're going to be a company with empathy, truly be a company with empathy, you've got to recognize that this is not a pain in someone's behind issue. This is just something that you can, one, do to care, and two, it's an audience that's going to love you back if you help them out.
That's true. They're gonna appreciate that. We're actually talking. We talk with visitor and tourism convention bureaus quite a bit. They're trying to make their destinations a place that everyone wants to go to. And I've been to a few of these events and the most fun events, by the way, we're trying to achieve a social good here, right? So it's business oriented, but we're trying to solve a social problem, which makes everything much more interesting and fun. And the people you get to meet who are doing this, you were talking about companies rolling out apps, and there's never a conversation of accessibility. Well, when you go to these shows, everybody's about accessibility. And a lot of the people are able and they're running their own businesses. And when you see what they've come up with, there's a gentleman, this is a fascinating guy. He grew up in Paris with both of his parents being blind and his older sister being blind. Or no, I'm sorry. Both of his parents being deaf and his older sister being deaf. And he grew up communicating with them, figuring out how to do that, and then also seeing them communicate with the outside world. So he's a young man. He's very smart. He created an app that lets, if you're deaf, one of the most frustrating things from my understanding is if you're in a room with more than one other person, and all of a sudden the conversation starts rolling over each other. And now when you were able to focus on someone's lips and their eyes and see what they were saying, now you don't know where the next person's coming from and talking. It's very frustrating for them. So his app is basically, it's a mobile app that it tracks the voice closest to its microphone. So everybody in there, in that room, their microphones are picking up what they're saying, and it's being transcribed for that deaf user. So they can see, oh, John said this, Kenneth said that, Jason said this. And this is a guy who did it because he did it for the people he loved. So does the app work? Is it accessible? I mean, this is how you get that kind of quality and those kind of good ideas. And that's where we're trying to get to. We need the smarter people to be able to solve these problems, the people that have an interest in it more than just, and I have a great team here, but there's a lot of great people out there that can help us do this as long as they know about it and as long as they can access technology. The other thing is, if they are disabled and they have good ideas, we see this all the time. We work with disabled people, developers, and testers. Some of them, my partner Ron is one of the best programmers I've ever met in my life. Hook him in with his eyes wide and be like, I just had a meeting with a blind developer, and the way that they're doing the code, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
I never would have thought of that, and it's better. That's perspective. That's one of the advantages we get. And I wrote an article recently for Wired about this, because the founder, the father of the internet, Vint Cerf, he was born deaf. That's why he focused on creating digital communication. He wrote the first couple of nodes of the internet. The guy is the chief scientist at Google, and he is a proponent of digital accessibility. He screams it from the rooftops, and he's at Google, and it's still not getting done. Just to give you an idea of how challenging it is to get everyone on board. That's the guy who brought us the internet. And then there's a story about Steve Jobs' first inspiration for Apple. There's a 1980 YouTube video from the Historical Society in Silicon Valley where they interview him, and he says the blue box that he bought on the street in like 1970 or something, which was a little device that you could plug in, you could put it in front of a payphone, and it would play tones that hacked into the telephone computers and connected that telephone call, thinking that it had already been paid because it was hearing the right tones that it could hear once it had been paid. Well, the gentleman who created that is kind of an eccentric guy, he's a little weird, but he was born blind, and he was obsessed with telephones, obsessed with sound. He could whistle at 2,600 megahertz. So he had absolute pitch. This was a guy whose hearing was elevated way beyond the average person, perhaps because he was blind. That's what he focused his life on. He created that blue box because he had that experience and that perspective of someone who was blind, and he understood things and he liked to hack into things. Steve Jobs said he said the first product I brought to Wozniak was that blue box, and yes, it was illegal and we weren't supposed to be doing it. He said, but that showed us the power of ideas, a theme that you'll see throughout the Apple company's growth. The power of ideas. Here is a little tiny piece of plastic that we can put together for $30, and it hacks in the most powerful computers on earth. That is what inspired him to keep going and to change all of our lives. So with those two individuals, we have disabled people innovating, probably because they're already faced with these challenges and they have a unique perspective. But now, 25 years later, the web is completely inaccessible to them because the rest of the normal people like us have taken over and ignored those challenges and standards.
Agreed. Well, Jason, you're on a shark's perspective, and I don't know of any sharks with accessibility issues, but I got to ask, what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
Favorite kind of shark? I didn't know you were going to ask me this, but I know you like sharks. I have to tell you, my favorite shark is a hammerhead, a 16-foot hammerhead, a specific individual shark that I happened to bump into on a dive in the Galapagos with my family.
Yeah.
It's a great diving spot. You probably know that. There's a lot of cold water, large animals. And the dive master took us down, and he's been doing this for years. And when we got to the boat, he said, that's a 16-footer. I mean, it's that big. But when I was down with him, I was staying close to him because I was the most amateur of all the divers. And he tapped my shoulder, and his eyes got really big, and he kind of gestured I should turn around. And the thing was coming right at me. It was a powerful moment because there is that automatic fear, but obviously as divers, we know it's not that dangerous to be around sharks. And, you can get on some of those dives, there can be 300 hammerheads above you.
Oh,
when
those
you're
migration,
diving.
it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
No. I agree.
You were you close to Darwin Island or Wolf Island or?
Boy, I forget exactly where we were. I know there's a specific, the islands down there are this really steep volcanic. So when you get out, you kind of follow that, and then you realize, oh my God, I'm 150 feet down, kind of thing. And the water's very cold. You think you're on the equator, and it's going to be tropic. It's freezing water. It's 50 degrees, and it's rough currents. Like you can't just get your open water card and go down there and go dive. You have to have some experience. They in the beginning, when you start out with them, they take you to a channel and they throw you off the boat and say, go out there and come back. Because the channels, the currents there, unlike anything else I've ever seen. But I can't remember the name of the specific island.
I hope you had a 5 mil suit on, so if not heavier. So,
But you still you got to heat that water up
Exactly.
first, right? So you're cold when you hit the water.
well, Jason, it's
Not
that
dry
special.
suit.
Well, it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
Yes, I am.
All right,
Hit me.
Number 1. It's a pizza question for you, since we talked a little bit about Domino's, and that's really kind of an injustice to the word pizza. But deep dish or thin crust?
Thin crust. I'm a New York guy.
Your
I mean, I don't live in New York, but I'm an East Coast guy, and I love New York. Yeah.
All right. Number 2. It's a comic book hero question. Lou Ferrigno as the Hulk or Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk?
I have to say Mark Ruffalo. I like the guy a lot. I like the way he does it, and I love Lou. But
He's hearing
I like
impaired.
Lou Ferrigno on King of Queens better than I like.
Yes,
Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
I tied it in somehow. So
That's a good.
number 3. Number 3. Founding fathers of the internet. Vint Cerf or Al Gore?
Well,
Al Gore
I
thought
have.
he was one at least.
I'm gonna.
Yeah.
But that brings up an interesting topic though, because there is a canned response to that we all have, and I don't want to get too dramatic, but you know how we have Pollock jokes.
Mm-hmm.
They're not politically correct anymore, obviously for good reason. But do you know where that came from? Why we always had jokes about Pollocks being stupid?
No, I don't.
That was from the Nazis.
Oh, geez.
So they created that and pushed it out, and it's still the barroom humor here 60 years later, because World War II was Germany and Russia crushing Poland. That's how it all started. And they wanted everyone to be okay with it, so they told everyone about Pollock. So that's I'm being a little hyperbolic with that, but Al Gore did champion this. Yeah. He legitimately helped, and Congress.
Agreed.
I mean, we saw Mark Zuckerberg talking to elected officials a couple of years back. They don't know anything. I mean, it's ridiculous to think that we should let them make these decisions. And that's actually one of our big challenges right now, Kenneth, is getting in the meetings where these standards are described for companies to understand in a way that makes sense for the user and for the business. And we can't rely on the politicians to do that. So we're trying to get enough of a conversation happening where we can have the experts and the disabled people have weigh in on those things. So I do like Al Gore's efforts. He did help, but Vint Cerf is a hero of mine, so he's the father of the internet as far as I'm concerned.
Well, when 70 to 80-year-old Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are making conversations about what to do with Facebook, it just scares me to death anyway. But the Nazis, I would imagine, I don't know any Nazis, but the Germans have never been known for any form or sense of humor, so that doesn't surprise me either. All right, number 4. Not that these jokes are any funnier, but number 4, Ray Charles or Stevie Wonder?
Whew.
2 people with accessibility issues that are brilliant singers.
And I love both of them. And I love both their music, but Stevie Wonder has that voice that kind of makes your spine tingle, and I'm a sucker for that. And Mandy's got that voice too. Yeah, she has those notes where there's something very human, very primal going on when you hear those notes. And I don't think Ray Charles had him but Stevie Wonder was a master.
Yeah, there's not a wrong answer with that one. So number 5, and the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Can I answer based on the entree, or do I have to have one or the other?
Oh, it's one or the other.
I know you're a Southern guy. I'm going to go with biscuits. I love biscuits. We don't do it that well up here, but when I get them, I love them. Get them done right.
Agreed. Well, Jason, where can people find out more about you, your thought leadership, learn more about Accessibility Shield, and more?
Well, accessibilityshield.com is the website, and there's some basic information on there. There's a way to reach out and have us take a look at your site for free, or just start a conversation. I would just ask that people start talking about it. Agreed. You don't need to hear me talk about it. You and I are both going to a lot of shows, and so we're trying to get the word out. What I do, but I just want people to talk about it, because eventually they will understand it and go to a provider that can do good work. And could not agree more. It's about hiring an electrician for your home more than anything else. And what I mean by that is we follow building codes for websites. We should follow building codes for websites. So you want to make sure that you're not being sold of, some snake oil when you do decide to do something about this. Don't do a knee-jerk reaction. Try to understand what it's like for the disabled. The thing I tell all prospects and clients and everyone else is unplug your monitor and unplug your mouse and go to your website. Does it work?
Mm-hmm.
And when you start thinking about that, that's how that's how millions of people are accessing the internet. And
Exactly.
once you realize that, you'll realize what we're talking about, at least in general terms.
We spend so much time talking about topics like vegan this and vegan that and companion dogs and so much stuff that it makes me laugh when you think about the millions of people who really legitimately need our help, and they're consumers as well.
Yes, and they're our fellow people, and I feel
Yeah,
blessed to be able to work on something that has a component like that. And when this happened in my life, I realized why I had failed at other things. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It was always about ego. It was about how much money can I generate, or I'm generating leads. How fast can I do it? And which is all fine, and I know, and I get it, and it's not a problem. But for me, when I realized that there was a business opportunity to perform and provide a social good, it changed it changed everything about my life, and it changes the way I talk to people, and it changes the way I do business. It changes the people I do business with. And I think in the end, when I look back on it, it's just because it's not about me. It's about somebody else. Once you are able to do something for somebody else, all the pressures and failures and disasters in your life, you start putting them in a different perspective. You realize, God, I'm walking around talking fast and trying to commit. There's a complete difference right now. So I feel fortunate to be part of that. I feel blessed that I don't have a disability, but I hear people talk, like sometimes the children of disabled parents. There's a girl whose parents are both blind, and I saw her interviewed, and she said, and they asked her about how it's affected her family and what she thinks of it. And she's like, well, I don't really think about it. She's like, if I lost my eyesight tomorrow, I would, I'd be upset, but I would just deal with it. I know how people deal with those things. So it's another, you don't know what you can handle until you get it. But the people that have been handed, difficulties, we don't acknowledge that in our day-to-day life. We're going to the hotel, we're going to the show, we're going to dinner, we're living our lives, we're raising our kids, whatever. These people are secretly, silently fighting and climbing these huge mountains. And we just got to acknowledge that. Just tone it down a little bit. Yeah, you're going to get a new BMW next year. That's great. But let's focus on, there's people suffering around you. They're not even complaining. They're just doing it to get it done. Then they're raising families and they're starting businesses. Once you meet those people, everything else seems a little silly, how big your house is and stuff like that. Let's get back to a little bit of realism, and we're all in this life trying to do our best. Don't get caught up in the wrong things. And this gives an opportunity for all of us to focus on one little thing that could help everyone else and change our technology remember, this thing's growing, the internet's growing pretty fast every day. We do it now. Who knows how it's going to benefit our grandchildren, but it's going to be better for them if we get these standards implemented now.
Agreed. Jason, thank you again so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you, Kenneth. It's been my pleasure.
So there was my conversation with Jason McKee, the Chief Marketing Officer of Accessibility Shield. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, we talk so much about empathy and charitable giving today. It's hot in business right now, and it should be. And I hope you even up that times 10 in your efforts. We do all this stuff, though, to look good. Well, here's an actual way of doing some good and can set the pace with the tone and personality of your brand. And think, how often does the conversation around helping people with accessibility issues actually come up, either internally at a brand or with an agency, as a way to help grow a business? A friend of mine has a great book about fanocracy and creating fans. Don't you think that helping those people with accessibility who need your help would also turn that audience into your fans as well as become advocates? Of course they will. Other than being the right thing to do, those people likely will reward you back with likes and shares and leads and sales. We see this with a lot of audiences that traditionally get embraced. Second, you're spending so much time looking at your audience and personas, but how about the real problems that those people and personas have just to consume a lot of the good messaging you might have? We're here to fix customers' problems, right? I don't want to sound too preachy here either. I've been guilty of this as well. It took something in my own life that happened to me years ago to better understand this and get a better perspective. But once you can relate and understand, then the light bulb comes on and it creates a whole new perspective on how you serve audiences. What you also want your C-level leadership to understand is how this can affect the bottom line in a positive way. Other than just doing the right thing and feeling better, that extra boost in performance metrics will help support this cause a lot further. Third, not doing something is a bad option. Very important, he said that the idea of ADA compliance is not to punish people. That's not what we're talking about here. The digital issue fix is to help, and that does help avoid a lot of the lawsuits that are coming up frequently today. When you look at the reactions that people have had over the years with ADA compliance, the shock for some, it's understandable when you think of the physical costs of retrofitting a door or anything like that. It's expensive. But if you're a marketer who loves to tout empathy, then making a site or form or picture or anything else more accessible is a no-brainer and not super expensive. And then just think about this from an SEO perspective. What you do here will generally help you a great deal in terms of SEO, as well as how the engines crawl. In a lot of my keynotes, I talk about replacing Google's colorful G and replacing that with a colorful C for customer. This is one way to make both of them happy. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. And as our guest said, we all have some kind of connection. So go find your connection and come back and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.